Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really try to pull out the key insights from a whole stack of sources for you.
Yep, get right to the good stuff.
Exactly. And today, our mission is all about science. What is it, really? How do different fields approach it? And we've got some fascinating examples of discovery, too.
We really do. The sources are great. Some YouTube transcripts from intro science courses, physics, astronomy, bio, chem, earth sciences.
A real mix. Plus textbook bits on the scientific process, energy, and even an article on interdisciplinary work.
So the idea is to give you, the listener, a solid handle on these things, maybe trigger a few aha moments without, drowning you in information.
Perfect. So let's dive in. The big question first. What exactly is science?
Well, at its most basic, science, it comes from the Latin scientia. For knowledge, it's really a process, a way of gaining knowledge about the natural world.
Process, okay.
And I mean, look at the last 500 years. It's been this incredible engine driving technological change like nothing else.
You can definitely see that everywhere. But it has limits, right? Science isn't about everything.
That's a really important point. Yeah, science deals with the material world, matter, energy, things we can observe, and crucially, things we can measure.
Okay, measure.
So questions about, say, morality or what's beautiful or spiritual beliefs, they're deeply important, of course, but they fall outside what science can directly address using its methods.
So how does that method, the scientific process, actually work? I think one source laid out some steps.
Yeah, the scientific method, it's often taught as this linear thing.
Yeah.
Observe, hypothesize, experiment, analyze, conclude.
Right.
But in practice, it's usually more dynamic. Scientists might loop back, refine ideas, but the core is absolutely about testing ideas, experiments, careful observation.
And testing hypotheses seems central.
Oh, absolutely. A hypothesis is basically a proposed explanation you can test. And a key thing is falsifiability. A good hypothesis has to be something you could potentially prove wrong.
Okay, so it's not just confirming what you think, you have to be able to disprove it too.
Exactly. Which leads to another point, the difference between a hypothesis and a theory. People mix these up all the time.
Yeah, it's just a theory. You hear that.
Right. But in science, a theory is, well, it's huge. It's a broad explanation for a whole set of observations that's been thoroughly tested, confirmed again and again by lots of different evidence.
So way more than just an initial idea.
Oh, miles more. It's the foundation, really. The hypothesis is like the starting suggestion. A theory is what's built after tons of evidence piles up.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about scientific laws? Where do they fit?
Laws often describe how nature behaves under certain conditions. Think mathematical formulas like Newton's law of gravity describing the force between masses.
So they tell you what happens.
Precisely, but they don't always explain why it happens.
Yeah.
The why is often the job of the theory, providing that deeper explanation for the observed law.
Got it. That's a helpful framework. Now, the sources also talked about the different types of science, the natural sciences. It seems like a pretty big umbrella.
It is. Natural sciences are basically the fields studying the physical world and its processes. You listed some physics, geology, biology, chemistry. Astronomy is in there too.
And environmental science was mentioned as cross-disciplinary.
Yeah, it pulls from several of those. But what unites them all fundamentally is that drive for knowledge. Curiosity, asking questions, wanting to understand.
That seems to be the core motivation.
Definitely. And the sources mention two ways scientists tend to reason: inductive and deductive.
Right. Those sound a bit formal. Can you break them down?
Sure. Inductive reasoning is like going from specific observations to a general conclusion. You see lots of white swans, so you might conclude inductively all swans are white. It's common in descriptive science finding patterns.
But then you find a black swan.
And your conclusion is wrong.
Exactly.
It's powerful, but can be overturned.
Okay, and deductive.
Deductive is the other way. Start with a general principle, predict specific results. If we accept the general principle that climate change causes warming, we can deduce that specific species ranges might shift. Then we look to see if they are shifting. It's more hypothesis-driven.
Starting big, looking for the details that fit.
You got it. And in reality, science usually mixes both, right? Observations spark general ideas, which you then test with specific predictions. It's a constant back and forth.
This is a great overview. I was really interested in the specifics from different fields, though. Let's start with physics. Professor Shankar's intro course at Yale sounded really ambitious.
Yeah, he covers a huge sweep, from Galileo and Newton, classical stuff, right up to relativity and quantum mechanics.
Wow.
And his point is that this isn't just for physics majors. He argues this foundational knowledge is useful for everyone. He had those funny examples.
The light speed patient.
Right, or the quantum baby, just showing how these seemingly abstract ideas might, connect to unexpected places.
It makes you think differently. He also talked about the main goal of physics.
Yeah.
Prediction.
Exactly. Predicting the future if you know the present state. For Newton's mechanics, that means knowing the initial conditions where something starts and its velocity.
Position and velocity.
That's the core. He even joked that the object's color is usually irrelevant for those fundamental predictions.
And math. Physics always seems heavy on math.
He acknowledged that, yeah. Trig, calculus derivatives, integrals, tools for change. But he also wanted to show how much you can grasp with relatively little math, focusing on the reasoning.
Thinking like a physicist.
That's the goal. Following the logic from a few basic laws, like in Newtonian mechanics.
He had that candy example, right? Throwing candy.
Yeah, simple, but it illustrates it perfectly. Where you let go, how fast, what direction, those initial conditions tell you where it'll land.
And then the equation for constant acceleration.
Right, xt equals x0 plus v0t plus 1/2 of t squared. He broke down what x0, initial position, and v0, initial velocity, mean within that formula.
And he made a point about knowing when the formulas don't apply anymore.
Super important. Like, the falling object formula is useless once it hits the ground. Formulas are tools with limits.
Right.
He even touched on something cool, how math equations in physics can sometimes give multiple answers. Like Dirac finding antiparticles predicted by his equation. The math can be smarter than we are sometimes.
Fascinating. Okay, let's switch gears to astronomy. Professor Bailyn's Yale course sounded different, really focused.
Totally different approach. Just 3 deep dives. Extrasolar planets, black holes, and dark energy.
Whoa.
And the idea is to get right to the edge of current research, what's happening now. He even said no textbook because it changes so fast.
That's amazing. And these things, exoplanets, black holes, you can't really see them directly, can you?
Mostly not. They're studied by their gravitational pull on things we can see. And what's neat is how these 3 topics involve different kinds of gravity. Well, Newtonian gravity works great for exoplanet orbits. But for black holes, you need Einstein's general relativity. And dark energy. Well, that might involve gravity we don't even understand yet. So gravity is the connecting thread.
Interesting. And the math level, similar to physics.
He said it's mostly high school level algebra and geometry, surprisingly. But the application is tricky. Applying it to, giant distant things where our everyday intuition doesn't help much, those word problems can be tough.
I bet. He used Kepler's laws as an example of scientific progress, right?
Yeah, a brilliant example. Kepler figured out that planets move in ellipses of description. Then Newton, using his law of gravity and inventing calculus along the way, explained why.
From description to explanation.
Exactly. That's how science often moves forward. He even mentioned the word revolution, originally meaning orbital motion, before it took on its political sense, thanks to Copernicus shifting our view of the cosmos.
Huh. Cool detail. And he also mentioned the bigger picture quest in physics.
Briefly, yeah. The search for a theory of everything, something to unite quantum mechanics and relativity. String theory is maybe the current best guess there.
Wow, big ideas.
But then he brought it right back down with Kepler's 3rd law, showing how a simplified version lets you easily calculate Jupiter's orbital period. Practical application.
Very cool. Okay, let's move to biology. The MIT intro course sounds like it's really changed over the years.
Oh, massively. The professors emphasized the huge shift after Watson, Crick, and Franklin figured out the structure of DNA in the 50s.
The double helix.
Right. Before that, biology was often more about taxonomy, classification, dissection. Afterwards, it became much more a molecular science, understanding life at the level of DNA, RNA, proteins. That structure revealed how genetic info is copied and passed on.
They mentioned the timescale, too. Billions of years.
It's an incredible timescale, from a possible early RNA world before DNA, up through multicellular life to us, and a knowledge explosion recently with genome sequencing.
Wow. Yeah, sequencing the human genome.
And finding out that we're all genetically so similar. Tiny differences account for all the variation we see. And another surprise, only a small bit of our DNA actually codes for proteins.
The dark matter of the genome.
Exactly. Figuring out what the rest does is a huge area of research now.
But even with all the diversity of life, there's a common foundation.
That's a key insight. The basic building blocks DNA, proteins, are remarkably universal across all life. despite huge differences in genome size or complexity.
And the DNA structure itself was the key.
It revealed the mechanism for replication, how life copies itself, a total game changer, Nobel Prize-winning stuff.
But technology must have advanced like crazy since then.
Unbelievably fast. Sequencing DNA got quicker and cheaper, leading to huge projects like the Human Genome Project, 1,000 Genomes, the Human Cell Atlas.
What's the point of those?
Understanding genetic diseases, developing personalized medicine, even synthetic biology, designing new biological systems. It's transforming medicine.
I like the bit about fluorescent proteins, watching cells live.
Isn't that amazing? Tagging proteins with colors and watching them move and interact inside living cells using microscopes, you can see cell division, see how proteins work or don't work in diseases like cancer.
So much insight.
Yeah.
But there's still big mysteries.
Oh, definitely. Like, how does the genome, the linear code of DNA, actually specify the 3D shape of an organism? They used the fruit fly embryo example. How do cells know where to go? How to fold into tissues?
Even with the whole code, we don't fully get that.
Right. Understanding that collective behavior, how complex shapes emerge from the interactions of millions of cells and proteins, that's a huge frontier. And they also briefly mentioned chemical energy, the potential energy in food molecules that cells unlock.
Right, basic energy concepts. Okay, chemistry next. Professor Drennan at MIT seemed really passionate about showing chemistry as a living field.
Very much so. She wanted to counter the idea of it being maybe dry or just historical. She highlighted modern chemists using it for, well, everything. Quantum dots in surgery, sensors for security, biofuels for energy.
So really relevant stuff.
Totally. She laid out the core concepts, too. Atoms, molecules, bonding, structure determining properties, reactions, thermodynamics, kinetics, equilibrium.
Equilibrium. That was the Green Lantern analogy.
Ah, yes, that was great. Unlike Green Lantern, who can bend the rules, chemists learn the actual rules of chemical balance and how to manipulate reactions.
Makes sense.
And she covered solubility, acids, bases, redox, transition metals, emphasizing how vital these are for biology, for material science, for everything. She said chemistry is fundamental to life. Clothes, even spelling MIT, physics, iMath, chemistry.
Nice.
And her point was that solving big global challenges needs chemistry. Her personal motivation was really touching too.
Wanting to equip students to build a better world for her daughter.
Exactly. Giving them the chemical knowledge to make a real difference across all sorts of fields.
Very inspiring. Okay, last one. Earth sciences, from the Oxford perspective. This sounded incredibly broad.
It really is. They define it as applying the basic sciences, bio, chem, physics, math to understand the Earth, past, present, future, and very quantitative.
Focused on numbers and data.
Yes, and they immediately connected it to massive societal challenges, feeding billions, natural hazards, resources, pollution, climate change, all linked to our growing population.
The helium example was surprising. Needed for MRIs.
Yeah, who knew? And their department is actually out there looking for new helium sources. Shows a direct link between Earth science research and, well, healthcare technology.
It really does. They also talk about the scales involved.
Immense scales. Time scales from seconds for earthquakes to billions of years for Earth's history. Spatial scales from nanometers and minerals to global ocean currents. They said only physics really deals with such a huge range.
And the scope of topics seemed like everything.
Pretty much. Deep Earth, mantle, crust, atmosphere, oceans, ice, life. Even other planets for comparison to understand how planets form and evolve generally.
So comparative planetology.
They tackle huge questions. How did life originate? Maybe deep sea vents. How is the planet reacting to more CO2? Hurricanes, sea level. Looking at climate over vast timescales.
Using modern tools, too, like satellites.
Definitely. Satellite data helps immensely with understanding hazards like earthquakes. And they stressed fieldwork getting out there, observing directly. It's key to learning in earth sciences.
Makes sense. And career paths seemed varied, too.
Yeah, both vocational energy, environment sectors, and non-vocational, like policy, communication, finance, where that analytical systems thinking skill is valued.
So covering all these fields really highlights how interconnected science is. Which brings us to that idea of interdisciplinary science.
Yes, and this is becoming so important. It's about deliberately mixing fields to tackle problems that are too complex for any single discipline.
The source mentioned a Turkish idiom, monkey appetite.
Yeah, lovingly critical, apparently. For someone who just can't stop exploring different areas, a great metaphor for that interdisciplinary curiosity.
Like Arzu Schultekin's story, from maps to Well, almost everything.
It's an amazing example. Started with cartography, then got into vision science, biology, optics, neuroscience, computer vision, even used DNA sequencing methods for usability studies, all spurred by asking, why do we have two eyes?
Wow. Just shows how one question can lead you anywhere if you cross boundaries.
Absolutely. And the physics-biology intersection was mentioned as a really hot area now.
Applying physics concepts to biological problems.
Exactly. There are even new journals like PRX Life dedicated just to that kind of research. It shows how much is happening there.
And this kind of thinking, mixing disciplines, is valuable beyond research, too.
Definitely. The Bath University source highlighted that graduates need multidisciplinary thinking to solve future problems we might not even anticipate yet. That's why natural sciences degrees exist, to train people to think that way.
It all connects. Finally, the sources distinguish between basic and applied science. How did they frame that?
They explained basic science as being driven purely by wanting to expand knowledge for knowledge's sake, without an immediate practical goal in mind.
It's curiosity.
Right. Applied science, then, is about using scientific knowledge to solve specific real-world problems, making something useful, fixing something.
But they're not totally separate tracks.
Not at all. That was a key point. Applied science very often depends completely on the discoveries made through basic science.
Like the DNA example.
Perfect example. Understanding DNA's structure was basic research, but it led directly to applied tech for genetic disease diagnosis, forensics, paternity tests, tons of stuff. The Human Genome Project, too, basic research, now fueling applied medical advances.
So you really need both.
Absolutely. Basic science builds the foundation, the pool of knowledge that applied science can then draw from, often in ways the original researchers never imagined. Both are vital.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it feels like the big takeaway is just how diverse science is, but also how unified in its core approach.
I think that's right. It's this huge landscape of different fields: physics, astronomy, biology, chemistry, earth sciences, each exploring different parts of the natural world across incredible scales.
But all using that fundamental process of observation, testing, evidence.
All driven by that quest for understanding. And increasingly, they're not working in isolation.
That interdisciplinary aspect seems crucial for the future.
It really does. Tackling complex issues like climate change or disease requires pooling knowledge from everywhere.
It's been fascinating mapping this out. You get a real sense of the scientific enterprise.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about all these different threads we touched on. Falling candy, distant galaxies, DNA's code, our planet's forces. How do they all connect back to that core idea of scientific inquiry?
Right.
And maybe ask yourself, which one of these areas really grabbed your attention? Maybe that's something worth digging into a bit more on your own.